They stand in silence, older than memory itself. Beneath moss, beneath sand, beneath the noise of modern life, ancient temples still breathe. Some rise like giants out of jungles, Angkor Wat wrapped in strangling roots, its stones cracked yet stubbornly alive. Others are half buried beneath shifting deserts, like the Egyptian temples swallowed by dunes for centuries before curious hands uncovered them again. The camera sweeps across these ruins, stone pillars carved with forgotten gods, halls echoing with whispers no human alive can understand. We have always been told that temples were places of peace, holy sanctuaries where humans sought blessings from the heavens. But what if that story is only half the truth? What if behind their beauty lies something darker, something deliberately hidden? Imagine walking into one of these temples not as a tourist, but as someone who lived thousands of years ago. You aren't here to admire architecture. You're here because your crops failed, because your child is sick, because the gods must be pleased. The towering statues don't comfort you, they terrify you. Stone lions glare from the shadows. Firelight flickers on walls painted red. The priest does not smile. You are not here to worship. You are here to surrender. These temples were not just houses of gods. They were machines of power. They controlled belief, controlled fear, controlled behavior. Step by step, civilization learned how to shape the human mind long before psychology ever existed. And yet, that is not how history books describe them. They talk of great architecture, of cultural symbolism, of sacred geometry. They rarely mention the screams that echoed through their chambers. They gloss over the secret passages found beneath their floors. They barely whisper about the altars stained dark. Why? Because history remembers what it wants to remember. And sometimes, it chooses beauty over truth. But the stones remember everything. Archaeologists digging beneath temple courtyards have found bones, human, animal, and sometimes, something they cannot identify. They found rings of scorch marks where fires once roared endlessly. They found channels carved into altar tables, sloping downward like drains. For centuries we believed these structures were built to honor gods. But what if some were built to feed them? And yet, even in these shadows, there is wonder. Because alongside sacrifice and fear, temples were also places of impossible genius. They aligned with stars so precisely that even modern engineers struggle to explain it. On certain days of the year, the sun enters through a doorway at the exact moment of sunrise and strikes a specific idol in the heart of the temple, perfectly, not 1 degree off. That is not coincidence. That is mastery. Someone knew exactly where the sun would be not just tomorrow, but centuries ahead. So what were these places really? Holy sites? Laboratories? Prisons? Stage sets? Or perhaps all at once? We picture religion as something based on blind faith, but ancient temples suggest something far more calculated. They were engineered environments designed to make you feel small, to fill you with awe, not by accident, but with intention. High ceilings echoing like thunder. Chambers tuned to resonate at frequencies that made skin crawl. Light funneled through narrow cracks to resemble halos. Smoke that blurred reality. Priests who appeared and disappeared like ghosts through hidden doors. Was it magic, or technology disguised as divine will? And then comes the strangest question of all. If temples were so powerful, so important, why were so many abandoned? Why were some buried deliberately? Why were others sealed shut forever with curses warning, "Do not open or suffer the wrath of the gods"? If they were monuments to enlightenment, why hide them? Unless there was something inside that even future generations were never meant to see. This journey is not about worship. It is about uncovering what has been carefully disguised for thousands of years. We are taught to admire ancient temples from the outside, but today, we go inside. Past the tourist paths. Past the ropes and restricted area signs. Into the locked chambers sealed with rusted doors. Into tunnels where light has not touched in centuries. Some stories will make you marvel. Some will make you shudder. Some will change how you see religion, science, and human nature altogether. Because once you understand the real purpose of ancient temples, you will start seeing echoes of them everywhere, in modern architecture, in political buildings, even in entertainment spaces. The methods may have changed. The gods may have new names. But the designs of influence remain the same. The stones have been silent long enough. It is time to listen. They told us temples were places where humans reached toward the divine. But in reality, it was often the divine reaching down to control the human. Strip away the incense, the chanting, the poetry, and temples begin to look less like holy shelters and more like carefully engineered systems of authority. They weren't built randomly. They were positioned, shaped, and decorated with intense precision, not for beauty alone, but for influence. The moment you walked in, you belonged to something bigger than yourself. Your identity, your status, even your freedom, all surrendered at the door. Picture an ancient city. Homes made of mud and straw. Streets uneven, roofs leaking, everything crude and temporary, except one thing. Rising above the chaos like a mountain stands the temple. Polished stone. Towering pillars. Gilded roofs reflecting sunlight like a beacon. It wasn't just the house of gods, it was propaganda in physical form. You could be poor, desperate, powerless, but the temple loomed over you every single day, reminding you who held the keys to fate. It wasn't the king. It wasn't the army. It was the priesthood. Ancient rulers understood something profound: you can control people through force, but you can control them far more efficiently through belief. And belief required performance. So temples were built not just as sacred spaces, but as theaters of obedience. Everything from the height of the doorways, designed to make you bow, to the echoing halls that amplified every word of the priest, was meant to place you in a state of psychological surrender. Even the floor plans were strategic. You didn't enter directly into the main chamber. You were made to walk through long, narrow corridors. Slow transitions from sunlight into darkness. Step by step, the world you knew faded behind you. By the time you reached the inner sanctum, you were no longer just a visitor, you were a participant in something designed to change your mind. And at the center of it all stood someone who wasn't elected, wasn't questioned, and wasn't to be disobeyed: the priest. Not the peaceful monk we imagine today, but a political figure equal to or even above the king. In many civilizations, Egypt, Sumer, India, Mesoamerica, the kings were considered divine only because the priests declared it so. Without temple approval, you weren't just unimportant. You were illegitimate. The power didn't flow downward from the throne. It flowed outward from the altar. But how did they maintain such influence? With information. Priests were the first scholars. They controlled writing, astronomy, calendars, medicine, law. They were the scientists and mathematicians of their time, but their discoveries weren't shared freely. Knowledge was locked inside temple walls like treasure. If you wanted to know when the rains would come, you asked a priest. If you wanted to know why lightning struck a house, you asked a priest. If you wanted forgiveness, you had to pay a priest. Slowly, temples became not just religious centers, but tax offices, courts, and think tanks rolled into one. Look at the great ziggurats of ancient Mesopotamia. They weren't simple pyramids, they were tiered platforms crowned with temples acting as command centers. From there, priests regulated grain distribution, land ownership, even currency. Offerings weren't symbolic. They were economic transactions. Gold, livestock, food, all funneled into the temple's vaults. Over time, temples became the wealthiest institutions in the ancient world. Some held more resources than entire kingdoms. And it wasn't just material wealth. It was emotional wealth too. Priests taught people when they were pure or impure, when they were blessed or cursed. By deciding what was holy and what was forbidden, they shaped morality itself. Imagine the power of telling a whole population that only you can cleanse their sins. That without your rituals, their souls are doomed. That every misfortune, illness, crop failure, stillbirth, is punishment from the gods unless they submit. That is not just religion. That is early psychology weaponized. Yet none of it would have worked without spectacle. Rituals weren't simple prayers, they were performances designed to overwhelm the senses. Smoke rising in spirals through shafts of light. Deep drums echoing in your chest like a second heartbeat. Masks and costumes turning men into gods before your eyes. When fire roared on the altars and the crowd chanted in unison, you didn't just believe. You felt the divine. And feeling is far harder to resist than logic. But beneath all this grandeur lay a quiet truth: most people never entered the holiest rooms. Ordinary citizens only saw the outer courtyards. The inner sanctums, where the so-called gods resided, were restricted to the elite. Only priests and kings could enter. What happened there was secret. What stood inside was forbidden to describe. Some cultures even punished blasphemers not for lying about gods, but for speaking the truth about what was really inside. In many temples, the idol was nothing more than stone, wood, or metal. Yet the illusion was so strong that people trembled in its presence. Was it faith? Or well-crafted manipulation? And here comes the question history rarely asks: did the priests themselves always believe? Or did some of them knowingly maintain illusions? Ancient texts reveal temple protocols: how to make statues, drink offerings through hidden tubes, how to move doors using heated air pressure, how to produce eerie voices through speaking funnels built inside walls. When worshippers gasped, the priests stayed silent. Was it reverence, or theater? There is no denying that temples inspired awe. But awe is a tool. In the hands of the benevolent, it guides. In the hands of the cunning, it controls. And across civilizations, one pattern repeats: when the priesthood grew too powerful, when temple taxes grew too heavy, when rituals turned from guidance to tyranny, societies rebelled. Kings shut down temples. Reformers called for new faiths. Some temples were smashed to dust. Others were sealed forever, their secrets locked away not out of respect, but fear. So when we look at these ruins today and think of peace, we are only seeing half the picture. Yes, they were places of prayer. But they were also fortresses of influence. They shaped civilization not through war, but through wonder. They didn't need swords. They had belief. And belief, in the right hands, is the sharpest weapon of all. The stories we tell about the past are often softened. We speak of devotion, of incense, of offerings laid gently before altars. But history, when unearthed with a shovel instead of a pen, tells a different story. Beneath the polished marble and sacred hymns, many temples were fed not with flowers and prayers, but with flesh. The ground beneath them is thick with silence, but silence can be read like a map. Beneath certain altars, archaeologists have found bones. Beneath certain steps, charred remains. And not by accident, by design. Imagine standing before an ancient altar. Sunlight flickers through torches, casting long shadows across carved stone. The people gather. Some come willingly, others dragged by duty or fear. The air is tense, not with peace, but with suspense. The priest stands tall, draped in sacred cloths, jeweled mask hiding his face. His voice booms not like a teacher, but like a judge. He does not speak of love. He speaks of wrath. The gods are angry. The gods demand balance. And balance, in many civilizations, meant blood. We like to think sacrifice was a rare event, exaggerated by legend. But the evidence insists otherwise. In the temples of the Aztecs, entire walls were lined with skulls. Rows upon rows, cleaned and displayed like trophies. The Templo Mayor in Tenochtitlan had what the Spaniards described as a tower of skulls, real, fused with mortar. At first, historians thought it was fantasy. Then they dug beneath the site in 2015. They found it. Hundreds of skulls cemented together, not just of warriors, but of women and children too. The gods, it seems, were not picky. But it wasn't just the Americas. Travel across the ocean to ancient Greece, where oracles whispered prophecies in temple chambers. For centuries, skeptics claimed sacrifices were mere myth. Then in 2016, researchers excavated Mount Lycaon, a site dedicated to Zeus. What they found shook even seasoned archaeologists: a human skeleton buried atop a sacrificial altar surrounded by ashes of countless animals. The bones belonged to a teenager. This was no accident. This was ritual. Go further east, to India's ancient fire temples. While many Hindu and Vedic rites today are symbolic, early texts speak plainly of Narabali, human sacrifice. Some texts describe it in horrifying detail, how victims were decorated like honored guests before being offered to Kali or Bhairava. Even if rare, the very existence of such rituals proves one thing: temples were not always places of peace. They were courts where life could be taken under divine justification. Even in ancient China, oracle bone inscriptions reveal ritual killings dedicated to ancestors and gods. Thousands of turtle shells and ox scapulae bear carvings describing victims, sometimes executed, sometimes buried alive beneath temple foundations. The belief was chillingly consistent across cultures: a temple was not complete until it drank life. Was it evil? Or was it science, misunderstood? Many sacrifices were not random but calculated. Some were performed during droughts, others before battles, others during celestial events. Priests may not have believed the gods needed blood, but they knew people believed it. And when a king demanded loyalty before war, what better stage than a temple soaked in fear? But here lies the most haunting question: were all sacrifices forced? Not always. Some stepped forward willingly. In ancient Celtic temples, accounts describe young warriors offering themselves to be burned inside giant effigies, the famous Wicker Man. Not as victims, but as volunteers. Were they brainwashed? Or did belief offer something more powerful than survival, immortality in memory? Even more unsettling is how many temples were built with sacrifice at their core, not just symbolically, but physically. In Egypt, foundation sacrifices were common. When a new temple was constructed, animals or humans were buried beneath its corners to bind the structure with spiritual strength. In Mesopotamia, clay tablets describe rituals where slaves were entombed alive within walls. Their souls were believed to become eternal guardians. And what about the blood itself? Some temples had grooves carved across altars like drains. Scholars once thought they were for cleaning rainwater. Then residue testing revealed traces of iron-rich fluids. These were not rain channels. They were blood channels. A chillingly efficient design. Some altars even had holes drilled downward, leading to underground basins. Imagine kneeling in prayer, unaware that beneath your feet lay a pool filled not with holy oil, but with the remains of the sacrificed. Modern viewers recoil at such imagery. But did the ancient people see it as horror, or duty? Sacrifice was not always punishment. Often it was seen as a sacred exchange. Give life, receive blessing. Some cultures believed the victim became divine upon death. That their screams were not agony, but ascension. Belief is the greatest illusionist, it can turn cruelty into honor. Yet, as centuries passed, revolutions came. New religions emerged. Old temples were abandoned. Sacrifices faded from memory. The altars were cleaned. The blood was scrubbed away. Stories were rewritten. What was once sacred became shameful. What was once open became hidden. But the earth does not forget. Bones cannot lie. Dig deep enough beneath any great temple, and you will find echoes of offerings once made. Some in fear. Some in devotion. Some in madness. So when we walk through ancient temples today and run our hands across smooth stone, we must remember, they were not always silent. They once echoed with drums, chants, and cries. Not just prayers, but pleas. Were these acts barbaric? Or were they reflections of a world where life was constantly threatened and death was always near? Perhaps sacrifice was not about cruelty, but desperation. When famine struck and no science could explain it, belief filled the void. And belief sometimes demanded flesh. The question we must ask is not why they did it. The question is, if we lived in their time, fearing what they feared, believing what they believed, would we have done differently? Not all power inside ancient temples came from blood or belief. Some came from something far more subtle, illusion. We assume ancient people were primitive, easily fooled, guided only by faith. But what if they were not simply superstitious, but strategically manipulated by carefully engineered sensory experiences? What if temples were not just places of worship, but theaters designed to blur the line between physical and divine? To modern eyes, we see carvings and pillars. But to those who once stood inside, the walls spoke. The statues breathed. The gods answered. Picture stepping into a temple in ancient Greece. The air is cool and damp. The walls curve inward just slightly, not enough to notice, but enough to bend sound. From across the chamber, someone whispers your name. You turn, but no one is there. Another whisper, this time behind you. You step closer to the altar, unnerved. The priest smiles knowingly. You believe the gods are speaking. In truth, the stones are. The Greeks were masters of acoustics. Archaeologists studying the Temple of Apollo at Didyma discovered cavities carved behind statues, hollow chambers designed to catch sound and carry it across the hall in ghostly echoes. Priests could speak through pipes hidden within walls, projecting their voices into chambers where no human stood. To the worshipper, it was not performance. It was revelation. Cross to Egypt, where the colossal statue of Memnon once sang at sunrise. Every morning, just as light touched the stone, it emitted a haunting tone, like a sigh, like the call of a god awakening. Ancient poets wrote of it in awe. But now, scientists know why. The heat from the rising sun expanded the stone, releasing trapped air through microfractures, producing sound. Nature became magic. Priests did not need to explain. They simply allowed mystery to speak for them. Travel further east, to Angkor Wat in Cambodia. Under certain lighting, a shadow snakes down the stairway of the Temple of Kukulkan in Mexico, perfectly timed with the equinox. A serpent made of light appears to descend from the heavens onto earth. Was it coincidence? No. The pyramid was engineered so that its steps would cast the illusion at only 2 moments in the entire year. Priests would gather crowds on those days, declaring that the god Quetzalcoatl had returned. No fire. No thunder. Just sunlight and angles, used as tools of authority. But temples didn't stop at sound and light. Some reached deeper, into the human mind. In Greece, the Temple of Asclepius was not just a place of healing rituals. Patients seeking divine dreams were made to sleep within dark chambers, surrounded by flickering torches and the sound of hissing, snakes slithering freely across the floor. These sacred snakes were harmless, but the fear, mixed with incense and chanting, pushed the mind into hallucination. Whatever the dream revealed, priests interpreted as the god's message. Healing came not through medicine, but suggestion. And what of the Oracle of Delphi? The priestess who delivered prophecies was not merely inspired, she was intoxicated. Beneath the temple ran geological fissures releasing ethylene gases. Breathing them in would induce euphoria, trance, and ecstatic speech. What the world believed were divine prophecies were, in fact, chemically induced visions. Yet the effect was real. Decisions of war and peace, coronations of kings, all guided by a woman swaying in a cloud of sweet gas. To the masses, she was the mouth of Apollo. To us, she was a human instrument inside a brilliantly constructed system of manipulation. Even India's ancient cave temples were crafted with psychological precision. The Kailasa temple in Ellora, carved from a single rock, is designed so that chants echo with unnatural depth, vibrating through the body. Sound becomes physical. It enters the chest, the spine. It makes prayer feel like contact. It is not the gods answering, it is architecture responding. The deeper you look, the more temples resemble early science labs. Priests were not simply praying, they were experimenting. Testing which sounds stirred emotion. Which lights inspired awe. Which fragrances calmed the fearful. Incense burned not just for scent, but for effect. Some contained mild psychoactive herbs. Not enough to incapacitate, just enough to soften the mind. Enough to make one more receptive. Is that evil? Or is it genius? Modern concerts use strobe lights and deep bass to trigger adrenaline. Political rallies use chants to create unity. Movie soundtracks manipulate fear and excitement. The tools have changed, but the method is the same. Ancient temples were not primitive. They were factories of emotion. Places where human senses were guided, gently or forcefully, toward belief. And here is the most chilling part, sometimes, the priests themselves disappeared from the equation. The illusions worked even without human presence. In Japan's Zen temples, water would drip in perfect rhythm onto echoing bowls, creating meditative soundscapes. In Mayan caves, flutes carved from bone were hung in the wind, playing melodies no human hand touched. Visitors would hear music in empty rooms. They would kneel. They would cry. So what were they worshipping, gods, or effects? Perhaps both. Perhaps for ancient people, there was no difference. The gods were not statues. They were feelings. Awe, fear, peace, wonder, summoned through architecture like spells through incantation. We stand today inside these ruins, staring at the stone and wondering what was believed. But belief is not carved on walls. It lives in air. In echoes. In tricks of light. If you listen closely, you can almost feel what they felt. The shift in heartbeat. The chill down the spine. Maybe temples were not meant to prove divinity. Maybe they were meant to manufacture it. Some secrets are not lost to time. They were never meant to be found. Buried beneath stone, sealed behind walls, locked with curses and legends, ancient temples often hid chambers no worshipper ever entered. Places where priests walked alone. Places where even kings were forbidden. These were not areas of prayer. They were areas of power. And when later generations stumbled upon them, they did not find enlightenment. They found fear. Imagine walking through a temple you believed you knew, a familiar sight of festivals and rituals. Then someone pulls a slab from the floor, revealing stairs spiraling downward into darkness. No carvings guide the way. No torches were ever lit here for ceremony. The air is stale, unbreathable, untouched for hundreds or thousands of years. Why build a room that no one would see? Beneath the temple of Osiris in Abydos, Egypt, lies the Osirian, a mysterious underground chamber made of cyclopean stone blocks, far older and heavier than the surrounding temple itself. Its architecture is unlike anything else in Egypt, flooded deliberately with water, forming a dark, reflective pool where pillars stand like silent sentinels. Scholars still argue about its purpose. Tomb? Initiation chamber? Portal between world of living and dead? Whatever its use, one thing is clear, it was never meant for public eyes. It was a place for transformation or terror, and perhaps both. In India, beneath the Padmanabhaswamy temple lies a vault known only as Vault B. It has never been opened in modern history. Other vaults of gold and jewels were unsealed, revealing unimaginable wealth, but this one was different. Legends claim it is guarded by serpent spirits and sealed with Naga Bandham, a mystical lock that can only be undone through sacred chants known only to ancient priests, chants no one alive remembers. Attempts to force it open were met with sudden storms and accidents. Coincidence, or warning? Travel across the ocean to the Mayan city of Chichen Itza. Beneath the famous pyramid, archaeologists discovered not one, but two chambers hidden within. Inside the second, they found a natural cenote, a deep well of water, directly beneath the temple's core. Why build a pyramid atop a sacred pool? Was it a gateway to the underworld, as the Maya believed? Or was it a mechanism, water amplifying sound, creating the roar of a serpent when someone clapped above? A secret only priestly hands could activate? Rome had its secrets too. In the Temple of Mithras, an underground cult site worshipped by soldiers and elites, narrow chambers led to a stone table marked with sacrificial grooves. The ceiling was carved with stars. Initiates were made to lie beneath grated floors while blood from bulls was poured onto them from above, a ritual known as tauroctony. But not all rooms were for the initiated. Some were sealed, containing only symbols, no bodies, no tools, as if waiting for someone who never returned. Japan's Ise Grand Shrine seems peaceful, rebuilt entirely every 20 years in a sacred ritual. Yet behind its inner fences stands a small building no human is ever allowed to enter. Not even the emperor. What lies inside? No one knows. Only a few priests are permitted to approach it from outside, and even they do not step within. Some say it contains the mirror of Amaterasu, a relic of the sun goddess. Others whisper it is empty, that the true power lies not in objects, but in mystery itself. Even in medieval cathedrals of Europe, secret passages run behind altars and under crypts. Some lead nowhere. Others lead to doors sealed with iron. One chamber under the Basilica of St. Paul in Rome remained unopened for 1,700 years, only discovered accidentally during electrical work. Inside were bones wrapped in silk and gold, not buried, but entombed upright as if standing guard. The strangest part is that many of these sealed rooms were not hurriedly closed, but ceremonially sealed. Plaster smoothed perfectly. Symbols carved to warn, do not enter. The one who breaks this boundary will suffer. Was it superstition, or protection of something truly dangerous? Sometimes the danger wasn't what lay inside, but what the rooms were made for. Some were found with strange scorch marks on walls, as if fires once burned within without ventilation. Others were filled with mercury, like the chambers believed to exist under China's first emperor's tomb, described as rivers of liquid metal flowing beneath replica palaces. Mercury is toxic. Why fill a sacred chamber with poison? Was it a trap, or fuel for rituals we no longer understand? It becomes clear that temples were split into two worlds. The upper, grand, ceremonial, welcoming. And the lower, hidden, forbidden, silent. The worshipper saw only beauty. The priest knew what lay beneath. A temple was a mask. The true face lay underground. We may never know what happened in those sealed rooms. Not fully. But perhaps that is the point. Some knowledge was never meant for all. It was meant for the few, those willing to enter darkness voluntarily. And so we are left with questions. Were those chambers used for sacred initiation, rebirth through fear? Were they prisons for heretics, erased from history beneath sacred floors? Were they tombs, not for kings, but for secrets themselves? Or were they something even stranger, places not for humans at all, but for something else? We enter temples today with cameras and flashlights. But the ancients entered them with trembling hearts. They believed, or were made to believe, that some doors should never be opened. And so we ask, did they seal those chambers to protect themselves, or to protect us? While hidden chambers and mysterious vaults reveal what temples concealed underneath, another layer of darkness resides not in architecture, but in sound. The ancients believed that stone was not enough to speak to gods. They needed frequencies. Vibrations. Voices that could bend the mind, shift reality, or open gates unseen. These were not mere chants. These were calculated sonic weapons, disguised as worship. Step into the hypogeum of Halsaflini in Malta. A subterranean temple over 5,000 years old. Deep within lies a chamber known today as the Oracle Room. Its walls are curved with impossible precision. Stand in its center and speak, even a whisper. Your voice does not echo. It blooms. The sound wraps around you, growing deeper, richer, vibrating through your bones. Archaeologists testing it found that the room resonates strongest at exactly 110 Hz, a frequency known to affect the human brain, inducing trance-like states. Was this accidental? Or designed? Why build such a precise acoustic chamber beneath a temple unless the priests knew what sound could do? Egypt had its own sonic mysteries. Inside the Great Pyramid's king's chamber, explorers noticed something strange. Certain humming tones made the granite walls vibrate. Some claimed they could feel pressure in their chest, as if the air itself were pulsing. Even the sarcophagus, carved from a single block of stone, resonates when struck like a tuning fork. Was this a tomb? Or a sound machine? Researchers later found that Egyptian temples often used specific proportions, not just for beauty, but for resonance. Priests may have chanted at exact pitches to activate walls, altars, even statues. Across the world in Peru, inside the Incan Temple of the Moon, certain rocks produce flute-like tones when struck. At Chichen Itza, clap once at the base of the pyramid, and the echo returns as a chirp. Not random, it mimics the call of the sacred Quetzal bird. Thousands of worshippers could clap in unison, summoning the cry of a god. But was it worship, or control? When people hear the voice of the divine, do they obey more easily? Ancient India developed mantra science far beyond mere recitation. Monks were forbidden from altering even a breath between syllables. The great temple towers, gopurams, were designed not only as gateways but as amplifiers. Stand beneath one during a ritual, and the chants do not remain external, they enter you. Vibrations roll through ribcage and skull until one cannot tell where the voice ends and the body begins. That is not prayer. That is programming. Even Christianity embraced the power of sound, though cloaked more gently. Gregorian chants, sung in vast stone cathedrals, are not simple hymns. They hover around frequencies that induce deep calm, almost paralysis. Sit long enough in a cathedral during chant and your sense of time melts away. Light becomes softer. Thought becomes slower. Those ancient choirs were not entertainment, they were technology. But not all sound was peaceful. Some was built to terrify. In Tibet, monks used kongling, trumpets made from human thigh bones, to summon spirits. Their vibration is low and mournful, the kind that activates primal fear. In ancient China, bronze drums thundered through temples during sacrifices, rhythmic beats designed to mimic the heartbeat. Fast at first, then slow, guiding entire crowds into synchronized breathing. One heartbeat. One mind. In Cambodia's Angkor Wat, the grand causeways produce hollow booming sounds when walked across in unison. Were they acoustic alarms? Or energy channels? Even today, villagers say that if many people walk together along its stone path at night, the temple awakens. Perhaps the most bizarre evidence lies in the ruins of Göbekli Tepe, the world's oldest known temple, over 11,000 years old. Circular enclosures with towering pillars covered in animals. But more than symbols, the rooms themselves are acoustic traps. Standing at the center, your voice amplifies like a god. Standing near the edge, you hear nothing. The design was intentional. One man speaking at the center could sound divine, while the audience could only listen in awe. Sound here was not a byproduct, it was hierarchy. Modern scientists have begun testing the effects of these ancient frequencies. When volunteers were exposed to long-duration chanting at low resonance, many reported altered vision, floating sensations, even emotional breakdowns. Some saw colors. Others heard voices. One person burst into tears for no reason. Imagine thousands experiencing that at once beneath the watchful eyes of priests. Was faith born, or engineered? Could it be that temples were less places of worship and more sonic laboratories? That priests were early sound engineers, manipulating minds without ever lifting a weapon? We assume the ancients lacked technology. But what if their technology was simply not metal or electricity, but vibration? A weapon that left no scars. A key that opened inner doors. A bridge between worlds. And then, one chilling thought emerges: what if some of those frequencies were not meant for humans at all? What if they were signals? Not to the gods above, but to something below. If sound could bend the mind, then symbols could bind the soul. Every ancient temple in the world, no matter the culture or continent, is covered in carvings. Not random decorations. Not mere storytelling. These were codes. Protective seals. Warning signs. Contracts between the seen and the unseen. And if you know how to read them, they whisper a very different history from the one carved neatly into modern textbooks. Look closely at the walls of Egyptian temples. Pharaohs are shown offering food to gods, but the gods are often depicted enormous, towering over mortals. This was not art style. It was hierarchy. Some beings were not symbolic, they were remembered. Some temples even show humanoid figures with animal heads not as myth, but as witness. The god Anubis stands with a knife over bound figures. The goddess Sekhmet breathes fire over kneeling foes. Were these metaphors, or documentation of entities priests feared more than kings? In India, carvings on temple walls show deities with multiple arms, holding weapons, riding beasts not found today. But what is rarely discussed are the hidden carvings, the ones tucked behind pillars, or near the base where worshippers rarely looked. Demons with twisted faces. Beings trapped beneath stone lattices. Some with expressions not of rage, but of terror. Why would priests carve fear into their own holy places? Unless those images were locks, visual cages designed to trap what words could not. Travel to Angkor Thom in Cambodia. The temple gates are lined with rows of stone figures, half gods, half demons, pulling on a massive serpent. Scholars call it the churning of the ocean myth. But why is it at the gate, the threshold between outside world and temple interior? Could it be more than a story? Could it be a filter, symbolically stripping away evil from those who enter? A spiritual security system carved in plain sight. Symbols repeat across cultures that never met. Spirals, serpents, eyes, stars. The spiral appears on Mayan pyramids, Scottish megaliths, and Hindu shrines. Always in sacred places. Always near points of entrance or water. It is not mere decoration. It is a marker, of energy, or danger. The all-seeing eye appears in Egypt atop the pyramid as the eye of Ra. It reappears in India as the eye of Shiva. In Greece as the eye of Providence. Later, in Christian cathedrals as the eye of God. Why would civilizations separated by oceans depict the same symbol watching silently from high places? What exactly were they all afraid of? Then there are the sigils, marks so strange that even modern scholars avoid interpreting them. On the walls of the hypogeum in Malta, repeating red ochre spirals and swirls appear near burial pits. Seen from within, they seem to twist and move in torchlight. Were they meant to hypnotize? or to weaken the veil between worlds. In African temples, Adinkra symbols draw protection against witches and spirits. In Norse shrines, runes carved in triangular shapes ward off Draugr, the walking dead. In Japanese temples, small paper talismans pasted on doors repel yokai. Different cultures. Same goal. To keep something out, or keep something in. Perhaps the most unsettling symbol appears not on walls, but on floors. In the Temple of Hatshepsut, a set of strange symbols form a circle, worn by centuries of footsteps. But the markings are not meant to be seen. They are meant to be stood on. In India, mandalas are drawn beneath initiates before rituals. In Tibet, monks walk through labyrinth patterns barefoot. In Christianity, cathedral floors often hide labyrinth designs beneath carpets. Why would every faith place markings underfoot? Unless walking itself was a ritual. Unless the body, unknowingly, activated them. But symbols were not just carved. They were fed. Priests poured milk, blood, wine, or oil over sacred carvings. They dressed statues in silk, adorned them with jewels. They spoke to them. Sang to them. Bathed them. A stone image treated not as a reminder of a god, but a vessel. A body waiting to be filled. Which raises a question few dare ask: were temples not homes for gods, but containers? And if symbols were locks, what were they locking in? Even today, some carvings are feared. In certain parts of India, villagers cover old temple statues with cloth and thorns, believing that removing the cover will unleash misfortune. In Egypt, locals refuse to touch certain hieroglyphs, particularly those depicting serpents and vultures. In Ireland, farmers avoid cutting trees growing near carved stone crosses. Not for respect, but fear. Somewhere deep in cultural memory, the message remains: these symbols are not dead. They sleep. Modern researchers digitally scanned temple walls in South America and found something incredible: many carvings align with constellations not visible today. Star maps frozen in stone. Were they calendars? Or coordinates? Some symbols seem to depict solar flares, comet impacts, eclipses. Recording past disasters, or predicting future ones. Then comes the strangest discovery of all. In Peru, at the site of Chavin de Huantar, archaeologists uncovered a temple filled with carved stone heads, each with distorted faces, bulging eyes, grimacing mouths. Some appear calm. Others appear as if screaming. Scientists first believed they were representations of gods. Later, they theorized they were humans transformed under influence of hallucinogenic ritual. But perhaps they were something more: warnings. This is what happens when you enter unprepared. Temples were not museums. They were machines. Built with intention. Layered with meaning. Encoded with symbols that activated not just the mind, but the world around them. Modern eyes see carvings as art. Ancient eyes saw them as contracts. And every contract has terms. Break them, and something collects. Look up from the stone floors and worn carvings, and you will see that ancient temples were not just grounded on earth, they were reaching toward the sky. From Egypt to India, from Cambodia to Peru, the alignment of sacred structures with the stars is undeniable. Modern archaeology has shown that many temples were built with astronomical precision that rivals today's engineering. And yet, this knowledge was often reserved for the elite few, priests and rulers who read the sky like scripture, who timed rituals not by the clock, but by the movement of celestial bodies. To the ordinary worshipper, the alignment was magic. To the priest, it was a tool of control. Consider the Egyptian temple of Karnak. Its massive hypostyle hall is aligned so that twice a year, during solstices, the first rays of the sun pierce the sanctuary to illuminate the hidden statue of Ammonius. For the people, it was the god himself appearing, blessing the land and their rulers. For priests, it was a meticulously calculated demonstration, observe the power of Ammonius. Obey his representative, the pharaoh. This was a lesson in obedience written not in words, but in sunlight. Travel east to Angkor Wat. The central tower mirrors the constellation of Draco, the dragon. During the spring equinox, sunlight streams along the causeways and touches specific reliefs, revealing sacred carvings with an almost supernatural precision. This was no accident. The builders were not only engineers, they were astronomers, mathematicians, and masters of ritual choreography. Thousands of devotees would gather at precisely calculated times to witness the divine alignment. The effect was overwhelming. Even the most skeptical heart would bend before such orchestrated perfection. In South America, the Maya took astronomical alignment to extremes. At El Castillo in Chichen Itza, a pyramid built with 365 steps, one for each day of the solar year, produces a serpent-shaped shadow along the balustrade during the equinox. The serpent seems to descend from the heavens, slithering down toward the earth in perfect motion. The spectacle was not for decoration. It marked time, forecasted agricultural cycles, and reinforced the authority of priests. The god Quetzalcoatl, it seemed, visited the people every year, on schedule. The timing of planting and harvesting, the dates of festivals, the direction of war, all orchestrated with shadows and stone. Even smaller temples were aligned. Megalithic stone circles in Britain, like Stonehenge, are oriented to solstices and lunar cycles. The builders did not leave written explanations, but the evidence is undeniable. People observed, calculated, and built to precise celestial measurements. On midsummer sunrise, the light passes through the heel stone and hits the altar in the center. For thousands of years, this astronomical choreography drew crowds who believed they were witnessing divine intervention. In truth, they were witnessing human mastery over the heavens. Some temples seem designed not only to connect humans to gods, but to reach them. Ziggurats in Mesopotamia, pyramids in Egypt and Mesoamerica, towering gopurams in India, they all point upward, as if lifting prayers directly to the stars. The higher the temple, the closer to heaven, or perhaps, closer to knowledge that was forbidden to ordinary people. Certain chambers within these temples were reserved for those who had studied celestial patterns for years. They could predict eclipses, comet appearances, and planetary alignments. To the uninitiated, it was prophecy. To the priests, it was science. The precision of these alignments raises a chilling possibility. Many temples are oriented to celestial positions that no longer exist in the same way due to precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis over thousands of years. Some orientations would have been accurate only at the moment of the temple's construction. In other words, the builders were creating temporal windows, a message frozen in stone, a spectacle meant to occur once in a lifetime, leaving followers in awe of divine timing. Even today, modern archaeologists and astronomers are stunned by these alignments. Laser scans, simulations, and celestial modeling show that thousands of years ago, these monuments formed a network of astronomical markers across continents. Was this knowledge shared across civilizations, or did separate cultures discover the same cosmic principles independently? Either scenario implies an advanced understanding of the cosmos, long before telescopes, computers, or modern mathematics. And all of it encoded into structures designed to inspire obedience and awe. But the connection to the stars was not purely symbolic. Some temples appear to have functioned as calendars. Religious festivals, seasonal rituals, and agricultural cycles were precisely coordinated with solar and lunar events. The Maya recorded eclipses in their carvings. Egyptian priests knew the heliacal rising of Sirius predicted the annual Nile flood. Even the Inca built Machu Picchu with its sun temple aligned to solstices, guiding planting and harvest schedules. Every stone, every shadow, every beam of sunlight was a mechanism for survival, and a demonstration of priestly authority. The heavens were both oracle and enforcer. And yet, for all this brilliance, there is an unsettling layer. Many temples were deliberately aligned to astronomical events no human would see for centuries. They were designed to speak across time, to act as messages for future generations, or perhaps for unknown entities. Some scholars suggest that these alignments created specific acoustic and visual effects at precise moments, producing phenomena that would appear miraculous to the uninitiated. Shadows, echoes, light, all choreographed in stone to manipulate perception. To the faithful, it was divine. To the priests, it was power. Temples aligned with the stars were not merely religious centers, they were observatories, laboratories, and theaters all at once. They created order out of chaos, teaching humans to follow celestial rhythms while reinforcing social hierarchies. And in their grandeur, they concealed darker truths. Not every alignment was for human benefit. Some may have been warnings. Some may have been traps. Some may have been experiments in perception, psychology, and control, designed to leave the worshipper in awe, or terror, at the universe itself. Standing today in these sacred spaces, it is easy to admire their beauty. But look closer, and you see the deeper intention. Temples were not built for casual devotion. They were built to impress, to manipulate, to encode knowledge. They were calendars, observatories, power stations, and warning systems all in one. Their stone walls whisper across millennia, "We understood the heavens. We controlled the people. We reached beyond the stars." And when the sun rises or sets, and shadows stretch across ancient altars in perfect alignment, you realize that the ancients left us more than temples. They left us evidence. Evidence that the skies were never simply above us, they were a tool, a weapon, and a mirror of the power that humans can wield when they understand the cosmos. Beyond the stars and hidden chambers, there is another secret layer of ancient temples, one that most visitors never perceive, because it is not in stone, light, or sound. It is in the air itself, the environment, the invisible forces manipulated by those who built these sacred spaces. The ancients understood something most of us take for granted today: the human body and mind are acutely sensitive to surroundings. Temperature, airflow, humidity, and even chemical composition could be harnessed to produce awe, fear, or reverence. Walk into a temple without realizing it, and every step, every breath, is carefully guided by design, creating experiences that modern psychology can barely explain. Take the subterranean temples of Malta, like the hypogeum. Descend into its labyrinthine corridors and chambers, and the air changes. It becomes cooler, heavier, almost electric. Researchers have measured unusual electromagnetic properties in certain chambers. These subtle energy fields could induce dizziness, tingling, or a sense of otherworldly presence. Modern visitors report feelings of euphoria or anxiety in specific corners of the hypogeum, physiological responses that priests of the time may have known to exploit. Without modern instruments, they understood how the body reacts to hidden forces. This was not chance. This was engineering. Similarly, the Indian cave temples carved into the cliffs at Ellora and Ajunta exhibit environmental mastery. Each chamber is ventilated through a system of shafts so precisely carved that fresh air reaches inner sanctums without disturbing ritual incense. Temperature gradients are controlled naturally, creating warm pockets in cold months and cool retreats in heat. Water channels are hidden under stone floors to regulate humidity and amplify the scent of offerings. Step into the inner chambers, and you are enveloped in a climate perfectly designed to focus attention, heighten senses, and encourage submission to ritual. Worshippers felt they were in a sacred realm, when in reality, it was a controlled microenvironment built to maximize psychological impact. Even ancient Greece applied similar techniques. At the sanctuary of Delphi, the famed oracle sat above underground fissures that released ethylene gas. This intoxicating, mind-altering gas induced visions, euphoria, and trance-like states. But the ancients didn't rely solely on chemistry. The natural rock formations amplified sound, creating whispers and echoes that seemed to come from nowhere. Light filtered through openings in ways that produced sudden brilliance or darkness, triggering physiological responses to elevate awe. Visitors didn't just see the oracle, they felt the divine presence in every nerve, every pulse, every breath. In Mesoamerica, the Maya and Aztecs understood environmental manipulation in open-air temples. Pyramid platforms were positioned to capture wind and sound. Ceremonial steps and plazas amplified the voices of priests, allowing thousands to hear commands, chants, and calls to attention without modern microphones. During ritual dances or sacrifices, smoke, light, and sound combined with architecture to create overwhelming sensory immersion. The worshipper's body reacted instinctively, heart rate elevated, senses sharpened, muscles tense, leaving no doubt that the gods were present. Modern psychologists call this multisensory conditioning, but the ancients did it intuitively, through trial, observation, and tradition passed over centuries. Even subtle changes were used deliberately. In Japan, Shinto shrines are often surrounded by forests or bamboo groves. The rustling leaves, filtered sunlight, and gentle trickling of water combine to induce calm and respect. Visitors moving along winding paths experience shifts in elevation and light that increase anticipation and heighten the sense of sacredness. The environment itself acts as a ritual guide, preparing the mind to receive the message of the shrine. The priests did not need to shout. The air, the sound, the light, and the path did the work. Some temples went further, altering the chemistry of the air with incense, smoke, and natural materials. Certain incense blends produced mild hallucinogenic effects, calming the anxious, elevating the inspired, or even producing visions in those most receptive. Smoke rises through hidden channels, curling and twisting in specific patterns, creating ethereal shapes in torchlight. Worshippers believed the forms were divine manifestations, but in truth, they were projections of physics, chemistry, and architecture orchestrated together. The result, an overwhelming feeling that the gods were all around. In addition, many temple floors were deliberately designed to influence movement and behavior. Steps of uneven height slowed entry, encouraging meditation or submission. Narrow passageways funneled crowds into smaller spaces, forcing physical closeness that intensified shared emotional response. In large halls, the echo of footsteps was engineered to feel like thunder. Even the texture of walls and floors, smooth marble, rough stone, or carved reliefs, was calculated to engage touch subconsciously. Walking through the temple became an unspoken ritual, a choreography of body and mind dictated by the structure itself. Perhaps most chilling is the idea that all these environmental manipulations worked in combination with the other tools of the temple: sound, light, symbol, hidden chambers, and even sacrifice. The temple was not a single experience. It was a system, a total sensory architecture designed to manipulate perception. Ordinary worshippers left altered, spiritually, mentally, and emotionally. The priests did not merely instruct them. They engineered them. It raises a profound question: when we marvel at the beauty of ancient temples today, are we appreciating divine inspiration, or are we witnessing the result of millennia of careful psychological engineering? The ancients understood that humans are more than minds, they are bodies, senses, and instincts. Every wall, every passage, every flicker of light and shadow was part of a calculated strategy. Temples were laboratories where the human experience was tested, observed, and manipulated in ways we are only beginning to understand. In the end, the temple's environments remind us that power was not only wielded with priests' words, rituals, or laws. It was wielded invisibly, through the very air people breathed, the floors they walked on, the sounds they heard, and the shadows they could not escape. Ancient temples were not static monuments. They were living, breathing systems of control and awe, designed to make the ordinary human feel small, vulnerable, and awestruck. And they worked, across continents, cultures, and millennia. Even after centuries, the most unsettling aspects of ancient temples remain in their stories, passed down through whispers, manuscripts, and legends. These are not tales of gods blessing devotees, but of temples as stages for human drama, intrigue, and sometimes horror. Priests and rulers understood that power is as much psychological as it is physical. Temples became theaters, arenas, and even prisons for human ambition and fear. The corridors echo not just with chants, but with schemes, secrets, and consequences that the ancients themselves could barely control. Consider the power struggles hidden within temples. In many civilizations, the priesthood was a political force as strong as kings and emperors. Control over a sacred site meant control over the population. In Mesopotamia, high priests held the authority to interpret omens, dictate when crops would be planted, and even determine the timing of wars. Temples stored wealth, gold, grain, and treasures from distant lands. Some of these storerooms were protected by labyrinthine passages, secret doors, and booby traps designed to keep ordinary people out. But they also kept rival priests and ambitious nobles out, lest the sacred and secular power fall into unworthy hands. Power, like the divine, was selective, concentrated, and merciless. In India, the Kanchipuram and Khajuraho temples reveal more than just sacred devotion. Hidden chambers, sculptures depicting human and divine interactions, and inscriptions suggest that temples were hubs of social control. Initiates were often isolated for days or weeks, learning sacred knowledge, codes, or chants that ordinary worshippers could never comprehend. Some stories even speak of rival priests sabotaging rituals, manipulating sacred fires, or tampering with offerings to discredit others. Temples were not just spiritual centers, they were arenas for influence, intimidation, and sometimes lethal rivalry. Europe's medieval cathedrals, while ostensibly places of worship, also concealed darker realities. Monastic orders and cathedral chapters wielded extraordinary authority. Decisions about life and death, commerce, taxation, and marriage often passed through the clergy before reaching secular rulers. Crypts, hidden staircases, and secret rooms were not only used to store relics but sometimes to imprison dissenters, heretics, or political enemies. One wrong word, one misstep, and you could find yourself trapped behind stone walls, forgotten, or forced to submit. Temples were more than sacred, they were instruments of obedience. Even in the Americas, power plays within temples left traces of fear. In the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, the Templo Mayor was the stage for not only religious rituals but also demonstrations of authority. Sacrificial ceremonies were performed publicly, ensuring the populace understood the consequences of rebellion. The priests were masters of psychological influence, crowds watched in awe, their senses overwhelmed by fire, sound, and the shock of ritual. Fear, respect, and devotion were inseparable. Temples enforced order, not just through divine authority but through tangible, human control. Sometimes, the very architecture reinforced obedience. Narrow corridors and steep stairways forced worshippers to move slowly, humbly, and attentively. Hidden chambers allowed priests to appear suddenly, as if materializing from the walls themselves. High terraces offered vantage points for surveillance, letting authorities watch, judge, and manipulate without revealing themselves. The temple became both stage and audience, a carefully orchestrated system designed to keep the people aware of their place, and of the unseen forces above them. But not all power within temples was used for domination. Some was used to educate, to transform, and to guide. Mystery schools, such as those in Egypt, Greece, and India, used temples as centers for teaching astronomy, medicine, sacred geometry, and philosophy. Initiates learned secrets of the universe encoded in carvings, chants, and rituals. Yet, even these teachings were selective, often restricted to the elite or carefully chosen disciples. Knowledge itself was a form of power, and temples ensured it remained protected, sometimes through secrecy and sometimes through fear. The tension between enlightenment and control is perhaps the most haunting feature of ancient temples. Walkers of the sacred path were promised knowledge, power, and divine favor. Yet every blessing was conditional, every revelation filtered through hierarchy, ritual, and authority. Failure to follow rules, misunderstanding of sacred symbols, or breaking of taboos could result in exile, shame, or death. Temples were not spaces of unconditional sanctuary. They were mechanisms that rewarded obedience and punished deviation, a combination of faith, psychology, and strict social control. Even the most beautiful temples carried a warning. Inscriptions, carvings, and myths frequently remind visitors that arrogance, greed, or impiety would bring divine or social consequences. From Mesopotamian cuneiform to Hindu shlokas, from Aztec codices to European frescoes, the message is consistent: the sacred is intertwined with power, and power is enforced through vigilance and ritual. Temples were places where mortals confronted the divine, yes, but also where the divine, priesthood, and societal structures converged to ensure control. And finally, there is the lingering unease that even after centuries, the same dynamics remain. The ruins speak not only of devotion but of calculated human manipulation, of fear and awe used to shape communities. The silence that now fills corridors once echoed with ceremony, strategy, and authority. The carvings, statues, and hidden chambers were never neutral. They were active participants in a system that controlled perception, behavior, and belief. They remind us that religion, politics, and power were inseparable in ancient societies, and that the temples themselves were the most sophisticated tools for maintaining that balance. When we wander through these ancient spaces today, it is tempting to romanticize the past, to see only the gods, the artistry, and the devotion. But the deeper story remains: temples were arenas of influence and intimidation, laboratories of human psychology, and monuments to both faith and authority. In understanding that, we see history not merely as a tale of worship, but as a complex web of control, fear, and awe. And we begin to grasp why the ancients, across continents and millennia, invested so much effort into these monumental spaces, not only to honor the divine, but to shape the mortal world in ways that still resonate today. As we step back from the stone walls, the hidden chambers, the acoustics, the carved symbols, and the carefully orchestrated alignments, a larger picture emerges, one that is both awe-inspiring and unsettling. Ancient temples were far more than sacred spaces. They were instruments, laboratories, theaters, and vaults. They were built to manipulate perception, to bend the mind, and to command the senses. They operated on multiple levels simultaneously: physical, emotional, spiritual, and psychological. Every stone, every carving, every hidden passage was a deliberate choice, a calculated expression of human ingenuity, ambition, and fear. The ancients understood something modern humans are only beginning to grasp: power does not always reside in weapons or armies. Sometimes it resides in shaping how people think, feel, and experience the world itself. Even today, centuries later, the echoes remain. Step inside a temple and you can feel it: the change in air, the slight vibration underfoot, the way light falls across reliefs, the sound that seems to travel with intention. Modern science explains some of it: acoustics, architecture, and environmental engineering. But not everything can be measured. Some effects remain subtle, almost mystical, leaving even the most skeptical visitor with a sense of awe, humility, or fear. The ancients mastered a principle that we too often overlook: the human mind and body are instruments themselves, capable of being guided by subtle forces when we are unaware. Perhaps the most haunting realization is that temples were not built for the many, but for the few. Priests, rulers, and initiates held the keys, knowledge of alignments, symbols, and secrets that governed both human and cosmic order. Ordinary worshippers experienced the effects without understanding them, moved by awe, fear, or devotion. In this way, temples became a bridge between the visible and invisible, the known and unknown, the mortal and divine. The power of the sacred was not just in gods or spirits, but in the design, the planning, and the orchestration of experience itself. Yet, as much as temples were tools of control, they were also centers of possibility. They inspired creativity, knowledge, and exploration. They preserved astronomical, mathematical, and artistic understanding for generations. They were places where humans sought meaning, confronted mortality, and attempted to grasp the infinite. Temples represent the duality of human ambition, the desire to worship and the desire to command, the search for transcendence and the assertion of authority. They are monuments to human intelligence, fear, and imagination, all carved, built, and engineered into stone and earth. Looking at these ruins today, we are confronted with a paradox. On one hand, they are beautiful, architectural marvels, artistic masterpieces, cultural treasures. On the other hand, they are reminders of manipulation and power, a testament to how far humans have gone to influence perception, control behavior, and consolidate authority. The same spaces that inspired reverence could also impose fear, obedience, and hierarchy. It is this duality that gives ancient temples their timeless mystique. They are simultaneously sacred and strategic, divine and human-made, inspiring and terrifying. We must also consider what has been lost. Buried chambers remain sealed, symbols remain undeciphered, and rituals remain unknown. Across continents, mysteries linger in shadows where sunlight never reaches. Every unexcavated temple, every blocked passage, every hidden alcove holds potential revelations, perhaps knowledge, perhaps warnings, perhaps something beyond our comprehension. The ancients understood boundaries, secrecy, and timing. They left clues but withheld full understanding, ensuring that some truths were experienced, not explained. Their temples were not museums. They were living systems, designed to engage, challenge, and even test humanity's curiosity and courage. Ultimately, ancient temples teach us about the human condition itself. They reveal that our desire to understand the world is inseparable from our desire to influence it. That power, fear, and awe are intertwined. That architecture, art, sound, and environment can be wielded as tools of authority as easily as they can inspire beauty. They remind us that history is not neutral. It is shaped by those who understood both human nature and the unseen forces of the world, and who could craft experiences that endure for millennia. Walking through these spaces today, we are not just observing the past. We are feeling echoes of ancient minds, strategies, and visions, still capable of influencing us, still capable of stirring wonder and unease. And perhaps that is the lasting lesson. Temples are more than monuments. They are messages, layered in stone and shadow, in sound and silence, in light and dark. They tell us that the line between the divine and the human, the sacred and the strategic, is often thinner than we realize. They challenge us to look beyond appearances, to question what we are shown, and to seek the unseen forces that shape perception. The past is never truly gone. It speaks to us in whispers and shadows, in echoes of rituals and the geometry of walls, reminding us that what humans create, humans can experience, in awe, in fear, and sometimes, in understanding. And as we step away from the temple, leaving behind the carvings, the corridors, the chambers, and the echoes, we carry with us a profound truth, that ancient temples were not just places of worship. They were experiments in human perception, records of ambition, and monuments to the complex interplay between power, fear, and devotion. They were, in every sense, living legacies, lessons in how to shape minds, hearts, and spirits. In their silence, they still speak. And in their shadows, they still teach. For those willing to see, the temples reveal not only the past, but timeless truths about humanity itself.